A new law has just made Steam lock adult games behind credit cards. Not age verification, not an ID check, but credit cards. And here's the real irony of this story. The very same payment companies that forced Steam to change their rules are actually now Valve's solution to a fun bit of UK regulation that everyone on the internet has heard about, the Online Safety Act. And of course, people have heard about it because it doesn't just impact the UK. These are global companies. But there's a problem. 32% of UK adults don't have credit cards. That means a lot of Steam users are now locked out completely. Now, Valve says that they've met their legal obligations, but have they? Because they've certainly went a way towards doing that. But we tested them, and it's a much messier picture than it seems, to the point where, on an unverified account, we've been able to access content that, well, it seems, per the Online Safety Act, we shouldn't be able to. And look, once fully in, this law carries fines of 10% of global revenue. For a company like Valve, that is billions. Now, personally, I don't want to see Valve get screwed by an impractical draconian law that I don't support, that's now leading to the UK wanting to basically find a way of dealing with VPNs. That means that this story matters. This is a law that inconveniences users, it opens up loads of privacy risks, and frankly, it's just not practical, and it may even make things worse for online safety, because it will force things underground. And that means we've got to talk about it. Valve says they're complying with the UK's Online Safety Act as of August 29th. The Steam support pages now explain the new reality to us, and when we go there, we see that UK users must undergo, quote, age assurance to access mature content games and their community hubs. What does that mean? Well, it means age verification. And we always knew that this was coming, but as we pointed out when the law took effect, Steam quite simply was not ready for compliance. Now, do you remember their old system? It was a tick box whenever you made your account to confirm that you were over the age of 13. And keep that number in mind because we're going to come back to it. They also blocked direct messaging until you had spent $5 on the platform, but of course, gift cards can actually bypass that. Adult content filters were on by default for new accounts, but obviously anyone could easily opt out of that. None of these measures were solidly compliant with the law. Valve knew they would draw attention the very moment a kid accessed something that they shouldn't. I'm sure you can imagine, as an example, the Daily Mail headlines that would animate the government. Here's the thing, Steam already had one advantage for this. They already had users' payment card information, and the UK government had approved that as a form of verification. So it's no surprise how Valve decided to solve that problem. Credit card verification is the policy, and credit card ownership is limited to 18-year-olds in the United Kingdom. Now, Ofcom have confirmed that it's a, quote, highly effective age verification method, and they say that among all age assurance mechanisms reviewed by Valve, that this process preserves the maximum degree of user privacy. Now, you can already register a card to your Steam account, and that means that to implement this rule, no new user data gets stored. If there is a verification issue, Steam says that you should talk to your bank first, and after you've done that, then talk to them. But they also suggest something quite interesting. The risk of running up a credit card bill should, quote, act as an additional deterrent to account sharing. It's a bit weird, and to some users, parts of this seem a little bit ridiculous. They've got 2-decade-old Steam accounts, so why would they need age verification now? Their Steam account is literally old enough to be of age. A simple answer, Valve is not a trustworthy source to the UK government. Now, others wonder why Valve don't follow the likes of Discord, Reddit, or Nexus mods. Those platforms are using services like Yoti or KID to scan IDs or faces to do verification. And they're doing that for a reason. Here's why. It is about what each system allows. So Discord has got 3 verification states: unverified, teen, which is between the ages of 13 and 18, and of course, adult. Basically, they need the granularity. Discord wants to keep under 13s as an audience, whilst of course also protecting them legally and being compliant with this law. But Valve aren't doing that. They've created a binary system. Either you access all content, or mature content gets blocked. That's basically it. Now, this approach was probably faster and cheaper for Valve to implement versus integrating a third-party provider and, having to strike up business with a new vendor. Plus, there is the sort of poetic justice here that it is the very same credit card companies that pushed Valve to change their rules that they are now handling user verification for Valve. So hey, I guess Valve's kind of making their opponents work for them, and that's a little bit satisfying. But there is, as always, an asterisk to this. Does it actually work? It doesn't. We kind of broke it immediately. So we tested this ourselves. We used a Steam account with a debit card linked and a PayPal linked. Neither of those are acceptable to the UK regulator, and both can be accessed by under 18s. That means there's no credit card attached. And the result is, on first glance, what you'd expect. This account can no longer access mature content games. If you try to click on a mature game store page, you will be blocked, and you'll get a new page with a link to add a credit card and TLDR of why you'd have to do this. Now, one good thing, though, through this, is it doesn't seem to be based on user tags, and sadly this does mean that, as an example, you can't mass tag Hello Kitty Island Adventure as BDSM, for a laugh. So it's altogether more troll-proof like this, and the ratings are likely part of the content questionnaire that all developers have got to fill out in Steam. We've talked about this before with age ratings, and the rule broadly succeeds at its goal. Unverified accounts cannot access mature content games, the very games that sparked these concerns. But those games get to stay on Steam. Valve gets to comply with the legal requirements, but there's a little problem. The account that we made can actually access mature 18+ rated games, which, isn't really what was kind of intended. Baldur's Gate 3, Agony, and Hatred are all available without verification. So this new system doesn't act like, say, a shop clerk checking your ID before you go to buy Call of Duty, at least not currently. Without verification, you can't access games like Honey Pop or the unrated version of Agony. Anything explicitly framed as mature content is blocked, but obviously there are some gray areas. Actually, it does get a little bit more dicey for Valve, because the store pages are blocked. As it turns out, that is not enough. The rough edges of this very rushed implementation are pretty damn clear here. So adult only is still a genre category on Steam, and our test account had opted in to seeing mature content generally. So basically, this unverified account can still access that genre page on the store. And you know what that means? Auto-playing trailers. With, shall I say, slapping meat. Screenshot galleries that appear whenever you hover over game titles, all of which can be incredibly not safe for work. And, well, if you've browsed around that tag, you don't need your imagination to think about why. Now, you still can't reach the actual store pages, because those are blocked, but the content is still visible in Steam's ecosystem. But for Valve, it actually gets a bit worse. You can install demos for these games if the install demo button appears on the main genre or featured pages. And you might remember that tool that Steam created for Steam Next Fest, where you could easily install demos without having to click through onto the store page. Well, that feature, which honestly is quite good, it's very convenient. I think we're all in favor of doing the things that we want with less clicks. Sadly, that feature could now get Steam in trouble with how it is currently implemented, because if unverified accounts can still access adult games this way, then regulators may have a problem with it. And, well, they do seem to have a problem with quite a lot these days. And we haven't even addressed the bigger issue here. Steam only blocked access to mature content games and discussion areas, but the Online Safety Act also regulates how people talk to each other to protect kids. Now, Steam's existing policies on direct messages, forums, and user-posted content, those are not changing under the new rules, and that's where things get dicey, because Steam's existing policies on DMs, forums, and user-posted content aren't changing under these rules. So right now, in theory, an unverified user can still access parts of Steam with content about bullying, coercion, and drug advocacy that is illegal in the United Kingdom. So, you could go onto a TF2 server and, maybe somebody plays a voice clip that says, "Smoke weed every day." Bam! The feds come through your door. Not exactly, but you get the point. Then there's the wider conversation. What if you simply don't have a credit card? Remember, 32% of UK adults don't have a credit card, and those people often have good reasons. Some are protecting themselves from financial risk. yes, you could just say, be responsible with your credit, Fivehead, and that's fair enough, but if it's still a struggle, not having a credit card is fairly useful. Just like if you want to help yourself sticking in your diet, maybe don't load your pantry full of chocolate bars. Right? You get the point. But for those people, well, they're now cut off here. They either engage with that financial model or they lose access to that part of Steam. And this is especially problematic given some new reports. These reports show that this applies to store pages for games that you already own. Now, you can seemingly keep playing your game, but you better hope that game doesn't have expansions to buy, and of course you better hope that you've already left your review, because you won't be able to access that unless you have a credit card. And this is likely just the beginning. Steam have already told users that they will be dealing with problems as they arise, so well, all the things that I've mentioned today are probably on their mind, because as this law moves from its initial implementation to basically the various levels of enforcement that will roll out over months, Valve will very much want to avoid the fines that can come with it. And this is the kind of risk that happens when, well, you're operating a massive platform, which is what Valve does. Where we're at is that Valve is now theoretically complying with the Online Safety Act, and the government has got no plans to repeal this law. A majority of the British public supports it, unfortunately. And just like with other examples, like say in Germany and Brazil with age restrictions, Valve will comply with the law, and that means that they are now held to the law. That also means they'll have to address any complaints against that law's standards. And we know that Valve will keep making changes to avoid more risk. Because obviously, look at the fines involved with this law. And reports are already suggesting that they're telling adult game makers something new, that they can no longer use early access as a business model. Because again, early access means the contents of the game, well, can be changing. So if a dev slips in a few nips, oh dear, now the game would be in violation. That's obviously frustrating to those developers who maybe would want to use the early access business model. And it's not like I'm blaming Valve for this. They're tightening their grip because they basically have to. And they also want to avoid any further challenges from payment processors. So they've got the payment processor problem, they've got problems with the law, with governments, and it's hard to do it all right. And the flaws in the system that I've highlighted today, those are not about us trying to tattle on Valve or get them in trouble. What we're showing is the depth of change needed to comply with this legislation. And remember, this is legislation that, as an example, Wikipedia has recently had a fairly large loss against. It's one that has actually just caused some sites to go down, to just pull their content or not be in the UK because they just can't really deal with the risk. And compliance isn't easy. These platforms were built before this law was a thing. A lot of deep systemic changes will have to happen. And this story is evidence of that, of all the different edge cases on Steam that probably make them violate the law even though they've made this change. And Valve will want to be careful because they could be made an example. The threat matters here. Remember, the threat is a fine of 10% of Valve's global revenue. That's a massive threat, and being banned in the UK, that also loses you quite a lot of money as well. Steam cannot take that lightly. Right now, it is unfortunate that it's end users who basically get most of the downsides here, and that this is a law that ultimately, be it with VPNs or other solutions, anyone can get around, and that means that it's probably, maybe less people will be exposed to content they shouldn't be exposed to, but maybe the driving of things underground and the incentives for users to find loopholes and workarounds will mean that people do get exposed to more extreme things that is not out in the daylight, that resides where we can't find it on the internet, and that sort of thing is deeply concerning. I think it's the type of second-order effect that government's pretty damn bad at appreciating. That's it for this video. I'd absolutely love your take on this and your experience of this, and if you want more video, check this one out next.